Yeah, so my name's Jeffrey Kuan. I'm a professor in the math department at Texas A&M. I also started my own accessibility company. So it's Taylor Swift Bot, and that's the logo there. My university wanted me to make it clear that I'm representing my company and not my university, so I could only put one affiliation on this slide, and I chose my company. Also, something I want to apologize for is that this PDF is WCAG compliant, which it is. After I uploaded the slides, I noticed that the alternative text for the logo is the placeholder that says figure, even though I remember typing in logo for Taylor Swift Bot. So I think I accidentally uploaded the wrong version or deleted it or something. So if you read the alternative text on that, it's there but not correct. But I'm aware of that problem, so sorry about that. So I'll start by motivating what I'm interested in. And so the motivation is, what can I, or I guess we, the people in this room, society in general maybe, do to support a typical, in quotes, American mathematician who wants to create accessible documents which meet legal requirements. So the title of my talk was End User Usage. So the user I have in mind is a typical American mathematician. And you could probably object that people should not just try to meet legal requirements, they should try to make things truly accessible. And that is absolutely true. But realistically, the typical, like the median mathematician in America probably doesn't want to actually do that, just to be honest. So the summary of my talk is that I'll give a little bit of context in the United States because I found that if I don't explain what's going on in America, nothing I say after that is going to make sense. America is kind of hard to understand if you don't live there. I'll say what I did, or what I've tried to do, and things that worked and things that didn't. I'll mention some possible solutions to issues that come up when an average mathematician tries to make accessible documents. And I just realized documents is misspelled now that I'm reading my slides, but that should be documents. Yeah, and I said in the abstract that I welcome feedback. Part of it is that I was invited by the Mathematical Association of America to give a presentation, to give a webinar on accessibility with LaTeX. Yeah, if I say something ridiculous, please let me know, just so I don't repeat the ridiculous thing to all of America. Okay, so the next few slides have a lot of text. You don't have to read the whole thing. So this is US laws about internal web pages. So Section 504, that's Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It basically says that any program that's receiving federal financial assistance or conducted by the federal government cannot discriminate on the basis of disability. And program or activity receiving federal financial assistance describes quite a few colleges and universities. There's a separate act called the Americans with Disabilities Act, often abbreviated ADA, if you haven't heard that. That was passed in 1990, and there's a specific section of that Title II that says that state and local governments have to ensure their services, programs, and activities are accessible to people with disabilities. Another section is for places of public accommodation. So for example, restaurants in the United States are supposed to have wheelchair access, even if they're privately owned, because they're places for the public. So that doesn't apply to like a personal home unless you're renting out your home as a hotel. Okay, so these affect internal, in the context of what we're doing here, this affects internal web pages. So if someone has, for example, if a student has trouble accessing information on like a learning management system, then they can request it to be remediated or read to them. So, external web pages. So the Rehabilitation Act, which I just mentioned, was passed before the internet was founded. So much later, in 1998, back when Congress could pass reasonable laws. Congress included Section 508, which states that agencies must give disabled employees and members of the public, so it's basically anyone who wants to go to a website, access to information. So that's pretty vague about what exactly that means, but since 2018, the US Access Board has required WCAG 2.0, and I should have said this stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, created by W3C. That's World Wide Web Consortium. Okay, so the next few slides are going to be a little more sparse in terms of text. So yeah, Congress can pass laws, the executive branch of the US government can make rules, but what actually happens? So this one is kind of important for context. So this is National Association of the Deaf versus Harvard and MIT. So this is a pretty infamous case. So what happened there was that Harvard and MIT had open courseware, and that included videos. And those videos were either not captioned or they were automatically captioned and captioned very badly. So the National Association of the Deaf tried working with Harvard and MIT to get them to caption the videos. And after, I think, 4 years of legal cases, the National Association of the Deaf won. So as a result of that, Harvard captioned their videos. In contrast, Berkeley just took down their videos. So that's going to be relevant because sometimes if you tell someone your documents have to be accessible, they just won't create documents. Yeah, so for context, I think Harvard and MIT are pretty good institutions, if you haven't heard of them. So I did my PhD at Harvard, and my advisor is at MIT. I think they get picked on just because they're wealthy and are famous. There's a dean at Texas A&M who told our math department we should try to be at the level of Harvard and MIT. I don't think he meant that he wants Texas A&M to be sued. But maybe he did mean that, I don't know. Another thing that's relevant is something referring to this person named Marcy Lipset. So there are people who take it upon themselves to file legal complaints whenever they can. I'm not one of those people. So what Marcy Lipset did was she went to basically every college and university webpage and checked if it was accessible, and almost none of them are. So she filed, I think, 1,700 legal complaints to the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. And the Department of Education at first tried to argue they did not have to respond to all of these. But after going through the courts, they decided they did have to respond to all of these. So you can actually file a legal complaint against a university you're not affiliated with under US law. I don't do that, so just to be clear. All right. So these are the most recent rules. These came out, actually they were announced 3 months ago. So by either 2026 or 2027, depending on the size of the population you serve. So all public colleges and universities have to make all their educational content WCAG 2.1 compliant. It actually goes more than that. If you've read the guidelines, somewhere in there it says if there are technical and legal restrictions, you can use an alternative conforming format. So for example, if someone says PDF is too hard to make accessible, we're going to post an HTML instead, then WCAG says that's fine. The Department of Justice basically decided that's going to be, you need to make a really strong case that a PDF can't be made accessible. So I'm just going to guess some point 3 to 4 years from now, someone in this room is going to be called in as an expert witness testimony, because I already know someone's going to argue that you can't make math PDFs accessible. hopefully that person's not going to be me, because I don't want to deal with that. I'm looking around to try to guess who it would be. Yeah, and something that came up, so people had suggested actual PDF standards for publicly posted PDFs that would make more sense. That did not become a rule, and I think part of that is going way back here. US Access Board has required WCAG 2.0 for the last few years. So I think part of the reasoning was going from 2.0 to 2.1 isn't too bad, and since universities has had time to prepare, even though they didn't, that was a reasonable standard. I also have a suspicion that if they required like a PDF standard legally, then universities actually would just post no PDFs. Okay, so, oh yeah, I mentioned archive here. So, yeah, so if you're a mathematician at a public college or university, so that includes me, that means by April 2026 or 2027, all your educational content has to be accessible by these guidelines. That also includes any textbooks you use, any lecture notes you produce, any handouts, any quizzes, any assignments, any exams. So I actually do know how to do that, so I'll be fine. I've yet to meet another American math professor who thinks they're going to be fine. Well, sorry, let me back up. Most people I talked about this say they'll just take down all their content and not post anything, which may or may not happen. I mentioned archive here. I'm not an attorney, but reading the rules, it's actually not clear to me if I'm allowed to link to an archive PDF from my webpage if the PDF is not accessible. So hopefully someone from archive is listening to this talk and can either do something or tell me I'm wrong or right or something. Okay. So that was a quick just context about the United States. So maybe that was a little bit dry. Any questions about what's going on in the US? Okay. Okay, if I can explain the US to Europeans, I think that's good exposition on my part. Okay, so I'll go on to actual things with LaTeX. So if you've been paying attention, and it's okay if you haven't, you may have noticed that I'm missing a slide, which is I was supposed to have a slide saying what I've done, what I've tried to do. So my university published an article about some of my work, which I didn't link to because I didn't want to link to Texas A&M because I'm not representing them. If you Google my name and Texas A&M and you find my webpage, there's a link to an article about my accessibility work. In that article, there's a YouTube video of me where I'm dressed up like Taylor Swift. And that might be the most interesting thing in that article. So if you want to see me dressed up like Taylor Swift, you can go to that article. But no, I'll say what I actually did accessibility-wise, which was in the state of Texas, we're required to post our syllabuses publicly on the internet. And there's also a separate law that anything we post has to be accessible. And so this was quite annoying for the math department because most of us would prefer to just make PDFs in LaTeX. And the typical PDF made from LaTeX is not accessible, so technically, legally can't be posted. So I made a template where other members of the math department could use that and post a legally compliant PDF. Whether it's like a well-tagged PDF, it's definitely not a well-tagged PDF. But yeah, so I think a few people used it, and it was actually okay. The good thing about the syllabus is it has a very rigid structure. So it's course description, prerequisites, grading, and it doesn't have to have math equations in it. So it's one of those things where technically you could do it in Word, but I don't know many math department members who like using Word. Okay. Yeah, there's other things I've done that I don't want to get into because it's not the point of this talk. One of my colleagues, so When I teach, I have handwritten notes, and I have a pretty quick script that converts it into an accessible, kind of accessible PDF. It works okay when I teach because I'm the one teaching. I'm trying to see if other people, like other instructors at other universities, could use that script. But I don't have too much to report on that yet. Okay, so cool. Yeah, so I'm doing good on time. So I'm going to go into just 4 different things I've noticed that would need to be addressed before I think a typical mathematician would be able to create like legally compliant PDF. So I'll just go through each of these and just briefly describe what it is and what it's about. I think most of you can guess what I mean by unorthodox LaTeX usage. So this might be true everywhere, but in the US, I think most mathematicians teach LaTeX to themselves. I'm the exception. When I did undergrad at Caltech, every math major was required to take a LaTeX class. So for example, I actually know what a hyphen is supposed to be, which actually many people don't. This doesn't mean I'm good at LaTeX. It just means I took a class. But I think just based on the fact that I took a class, I'm slightly above average than most other mathematicians. Yeah, so there are things like sometimes a user will use a list for something that's not a list. They'll use a table to align things. Someone used multi-columns to align things, which I think most of you would probably agree is not how LaTeX should be used. I often use LaTeX incorrectly, so not the gold standard of good LaTeX usage either. One of the other issues is that most instructors in the US don't learn about accessibility. So if someone wants to do a degree, for example, in math education or get a PhD in math, they basically are not taught, for example, what like H2 means or the difference between unordered or ordered list. And then they get a job. Well, sorry, most PhD students don't get a job, but if you do get a job in academia, then suddenly you're expected to know about accessibility. Okay, so that's probably not surprising to most of you. So I don't know if these are good solutions or not. Yeah, I mean, I think there really is some point where users should just be educated on like how LaTeX actually should be used. So I think maybe this is one of the reasons the Mathematical Association for America invited me. They really should have invited one of you, but I think because I'm American, it's a little more natural. Possibly universities should just start teaching LaTeX sooner. I think at Texas A&M, for example, it's a junior level class and it's not required, but there isn't necessarily a reason you can't even do like at Texas A&M, there's a writing class and part of that is LaTeX, but there isn't necessarily a reason you can't do like a seminar of a few hours, because it doesn't take an entire class to learn LaTeX, right? Okay. I also think just learning about accessibility should be part of graduate studies. Like if for example, if you finish a PhD in math in the US, I think somewhere in there you should have learned basics of accessibility, just in the way that most PhDs who finish a math degree in the US are expected to know LaTeX. So if that could magically happen, I think that would help a lot. Okay. Institutional support. So I think this might be a US-specific thing. So most colleges and universities have a disability resources department. It's basically legally required. So this is good. And most places will also hire instructional designers. So these are people who help design courses, but don't necessarily teach full-time as part of their job. Last spring, Texas A&M College of Arts and Sciences somehow did not have an instructional designer. So if I had an issue with Zoom or MediaSite, I was basically just trying to guess. But part of the issue there is that usually the people who do these are not mathematicians. So there's There could be problems there. So one example is that I had a colleague in disability resources who said that, who suggested using math type to create accessible math. And I'll also say, as much as I care about accessibility, if someone like forced me to use math type to make documents, I just would also not create documents. So I would just pull up Berkeley. Yeah, fortunately, I showed him some examples of PDFs I made with LaTeX. And he was like, yeah, that's actually probably okay for most of your students. So he sort of backed off on that. But it's because I showed him an example. I've heard some colleges will actually like not let their instructors use LaTeX. Which I think we all agree is not good, right? Okay. Yeah, so the other thing is, even though it's the law to do certain, even though it's the law to follow certain, disability rights, certain civil rights legislation, in the US, wealthier universities, I honestly think they just budget for lawsuits. Like, it's just part of their operating expenses. I think less wealthy places, I said university, but I'm including at colleges and community colleges. They often care a little bit more because they're more student-facing, but they just don't have enough money for accessibility, and in my opinion, they often overspend because they don't necessarily know any better. Okay, solutions, I don't know. Multiple question marks, they're tending confusion. Yeah, threatening with lawsuits, I'm not really sure how well that's going to work. I think one thing that I think often helps is if you frame it as student success, so it helps all students, then usually administrators listen slightly more. So this is in contrast if you say, well, I have a blind student. Well, what if I have a blind student who needs to read this PDF? Often the response is, well, we don't get many blind students, so that doesn't affect us too much. If you frame it as, accessibility helps everyone, for example, text-to-speech is used by a lot of people, it helps a little bit more with that conversation. But that's kind of a political thing. Yeah, I don't even think universities care about having a pedal lawsuit. I think it's more the bad publicity. So maybe in the United States or worldwide, things will change where if university isn't supporting students with disabilities, it'll affect their donorship. And then they might care. Or they might not, I don't know. So the previous slide I said, many people who support accessibilities are not themselves mathematicians, so they're not necessarily, it's often people who just say things like, oh, math type is better than LaTeX, without realizing, most mathematicians aren't going to use math type. So yeah, if anyone listening to this has a job opening and you happen to want to hire a mathematician, like a research mathematician who supports accessibility, I don't know, maybe let them know. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I should be able to finish on time. So I misspelled structure. I don't know why. So you can tell I didn't use text-to-speech when proofreading this, because if I had, I would have noticed I misspelled words here. Yeah, incentives in the US are often based on whose job it is to make things accessible, and most people think it's someone else's job or no one's job. So research faculty, for example, people on tenure track, are most incentivized to do research, publish in good journals. Teaching often is part of the job, but not the main job duty. So I think I'm the exception in that I'm a research faculty who actually cares about this. Instructional faculty, so that's sort of like adjuncts, lecturers. They actually, I think, do care more, but there's less political capital if you don't have tenure to argue with people about things. I don't even have that much political capital, but I still argue. Yeah, so that's one of the things that just makes you stuck for a while. So I think as was mentioned earlier this morning, if you receive federal funding, you kind of are expected to make things accessible, and a lot of federal grants, you could ask for money to make things accessible. I mean, if you don't ask, then they probably won't give it to you. So I think if more research faculty are told, this is a way to just like slightly increase the chances of you getting funding, I think that might help. Yeah, it's not clear to me how well that'll work. So for example, the National Science Foundation will sometimes say, please upload an accessible PDF to meet legal requirements. Not sometimes, they do say that. And I'll say, okay, well, how do I do that? And they'll say, oh, well, there's this button you click on Adobe Acrobat, which will do it for you. And okay, I think we all know there's no button that Adobe Acrobat actually does that, right? And often the PDFs I get from publishers aren't accessible. And this doesn't seem legal to me, but I don't run the government. Reward accessibility work. Just as a personal experience, I found that if I make my documents just more accessible, students access the information, and I get much fewer complaints about my teaching, and actually fewer students come to office hours. So I actually get more time. So it's win-win. The students learn better. I, even on a selfish level, don't have to talk to a student who just failed an exam because he's self-diagnosed with dyslexia but didn't get an actual diagnosis and didn't read the content. Okay, that kind of conversation. Okay, last slide, because I have 2 minutes left. I think I've mentioned several prominent accessibility organizations in the US claim that PDFs created through LaTeX are never accessible. So I'm going to read a quote. This is from Penn State. So they have a reasonably, actually quite well-respected accessibility center. And people have sent me their link before. This is the quote. Okay. It says, a PDF file created from a TeX file is always inaccessible. So it's not hard to make accessible or usually inaccessible. They're saying it's always inaccessible, which I think we all know is obviously not true. So I've had instructional designers at other universities just like go to that website, read it, and just be like, oh, so like our math department just shouldn't use LaTeX. So that's kind of a problem. Yeah, I think even at the Archive Accessibility Forum last year, I recall someone suggested that PDFs should be banned, which was a suggestion that was not implemented, as you know. Otherwise, this meeting would be a lot different right now. Okay, solutions, I don't know. Maybe someone at Tech Users Group or Overleaf should just email people telling them they're wrong. When I give my presentation at MAA, I'm just going to start telling people they're wrong, because this is the type of thing that just doesn't help. Okay, I am basically out of slides and out of time, so hopefully that was helpful. And yeah, thanks for listening.
All right, thanks, Jeffrey. Any questions, Joseph?
This is probably quite philosophical. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. So the law in the US is quite hard line in the sense it says you have to make it accessible whether or not anyone complains, whether you've got any specific requirements, users wanting things to be done. And so the response, as you said, is to remove stuff, is one way of going.
Yes.
Do people promoting accessibility in the US think that's a good outcome? Because the UK law says we have to make adjustments when people ask, essentially. And the pressure, I work at university, and our pressure is we should put stuff online because people want it, students want it generally. So we'd get into big trouble if we tried to remove things, because our policy is that you always have to put your lecture notes online in advance of the lectures, for example.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. Okay,
yeah, so that's my university's policy. So that's just, So I'm just wondering, because it seems it's a very different philosophy, which could be completely counterproductive to what the aim is, which is to make things accessible for everyone. So I just wondered, is the law seen as the right approach in the US, I suppose, is what I'm wondering.
I guess what's right is subjective, but I can say almost all disability advocates would say that removing content is not a good outcome. So you need to find you, they, I guess, they would need to find a balance between making laws that are strong enough that they actually help, but not so strong that universities think it's a good idea to just remove all their content. So I think that's part of the reason why PDF standards weren't listed there, because I think the suspicion was that would just be too hard to do.
You had a solution to describing something with lawsuits. That's something I have created a package. It's called regulatory.
Regulatory. Oh, cool.
It's aimed for Dutch initially,
Okay.
but I'm curious if you want to look at it.
Oh, I definitely want to look at it.
To make it suitable for the US. But then you could, well, that's the right thing, I guess, in some way, that you send them some pretty PDF hardcore legal documents to start lawsuits. You only have to find a lawyer, I guess.
Oh wait, I said that publicly. That's an idea, yeah. Yeah, we should talk.
All right. Everybody happy? Excellent.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey.